be? Let's see. We're live. Wow, amazing. Um, we're also here perfectly. Working. So let me see. We don't have any white noise, supposedly. So let me see. YouTube properties. Uh, is this one? Yeah. Okay. We move from here to here. It is fully captured. YouTube. Yeah. Okay. Then I just need. Let's check on the second. I need to take this from here. I need to move it to. It goes into here the creator dashboard. Give me a second. So yeah, see video starting. Yes, ah man. Oh yeah, I don't even know if the what will work or not, taking into account that we had some problems earlier. I thought it was going to work, but it ended up not to. It's one and only fucking show. So we will see. What ends up happening in that sense. Let me. In a second, I want to tell myself. Do you have what on? Wait, I need to get closer to the mic. Okay. Aside from that, we have what on. So. Let me close a little bit of windows and all of that. Well, I didn't even say anywhere that I was going live, so kind of hard to get anybody to to know what is going on. Let me say like this. Uh, we are learning, yeah. Uh, and now let me add my link on another point, and there it is. With that we have it covered. Post, basically, yeah, right? Oh, there it is. Now we are ready to start this. Let me see. We have, well, I can check if the work is working or not. Fuck. Anyways, I will do it the easy way, just in case the what decides to never work this whole day, streaming and like this. There it is. Uh, uh, there it is. And now we should be properly on air system, you know. Anyways, I need to activate the background noise. YouTube, we are there. We are live transmission. Give me a second. Transition, and okay, we have a long video to watch, so we might as well start with this. The sooner the better, let's say. Oh, oh yeah, also, I forgot that
So today
it
I
is
want to talk
going
with
to
you
have a
about
hard.
how it is that we can do research of a scientific kind for something as complex as human behavior. As opposed to things that you measure out in space or test tubes or under microscopes, people are complex organisms, right? And so to do research on them, to understand human nature, how the mind works, how the brain supports it, is a challenging story. So usual thing is an experiment in a group of participants, and we'll talk about that. But in the reading for today, and I know it's the first time we've done this, so you may not have read it, but if you have, that'd be great, is a kind of another thread of the kind of way that people are studied, which is dramatic individual stories, case studies, single stories that are illustrative of something that we think are broader principles. And a lot of our biggest discoveries, and we'll come to that later in the course, have been made on very unusual single individuals who turn out to have a lesson that's pretty broad, for example, for the organization of the human brain. So in the Oliver Sacks book, there's a story about Donald, and what did Donald do that got him in big trouble? Yeah, he murdered his girlfriend while he was on PCP. He's in a psychiatric hospital. They try hypnosis to help him remember it. He says he doesn't remember it. Many of you may know that an astounding number of criminals under interrogation tell you they don't remember anything about the episode involved. Right? So people are suspicious at first for many reasons, because the easiest thing to say is I don't remember what happened, and then you can't catch yourself in a lie or any complexity, right? Because you don't remember what happened. And sometimes you don't remember, and sometimes you do. But in this case, they try hypnosis. That doesn't help. He's in there for 4 years, and then he knows conceptually that he murdered his girlfriend, and he says, I'm not fit for society. He knows it's a terrible thing he did. But it's kind of like an intellectual knowledge, right? It's not a feeling, it's not a memory. And then he goes biking and something happens. He gets hit by a car. So there's what appears to be a drug-induced amnesia of the original murderous episode. He gets hit by a car. He has a severe head injury. He's in a coma for 2 weeks. He has left-sided weakness as he comes out of it, which means the biggest injury was in the right side of his brain. Weakness and numbness. And he has frontal lobe contusions. He has injury and bleeding around the frontal lobe, the cortex that sits in the front of the brain. But now a remarkable thing happened. It's the two insults, 2 wrongs made a right. The first wrong being the PCP, the second wrong being the accident. Now what happened? He remembers in vivid and horror detail the horror that he actually committed. 2 insults to the brain, one drug-induced, one a focal injury, repressed the memory, and an unrepressed the memory. And one of the first things they have to do is discover whether he really has his memory or he just thinks he has his memory. How do they figure out to their satisfaction whether it's a really recovered memory or a fabrication of his mind? Right, that's really important. He remembers details of the murder that are not publicly available, that were not that was a really huge kind of memory. So it's a really recovered memory, not an inadvertently fabricated memory. And they discover he has deep seizure activity in his limbic structure. Parts of his brain that are involved in emotion are having a seizure. So epilepsy, neurons are firing for no good reason. And that's part of his disorder. They give him medications to help with that. But here's question for you for a moment to think about, and it's now such a common question because our society is moving that way that it's on many TV. I see it like every couple of weeks. There's a Law and Order episode that has something like this, which is the more you know about the biology that underlies that real criminal, terrible behavior, would that be a cause for understanding it or not?
Okay, I guess so far, okay, give me a second. Shut up, guitar. I guess the point tries to be, or not the point, I guess the idea at hand is, for example, I see it from the perspective of, a lot of times what tends to happen is because the trauma itself that people undergoes ends end up being so incredibly great. A lot of times it also happens that the memories themselves created because of this process are also lost, or these experiences, so to speak, are lost because of the way in which these events themselves also feel like one of the burdens from life that the individuals already like to not have to deal with anymore, I will say. But in these occasions, I cannot completely conceive as to why it happened. No, I hope the solution as to why such a random event, like having a brain injury that ends up being healed, triggers the memory to resurface. I will guess it has to deal with the fact that when the brain itself is shake so much, it ends up basically in a state in which everything that was touched during the shaking itself resurfaces, let's say. But I don't think that is the whole truth of this, right?
Okay, so in this case, he took the drugs, he killed the person you think is pretty responsible. But how about somebody who kills somebody? Turns out, in such a case, a man with no history, a grown man with no history of criminal activity of any kind, shoved his wife out of a high window in the course of a standard argument. Right? Then they discovered that he has a big tumor growing basal part of the frontal cortex. Now, is the man responsible for what he did?
Yes, I
It's
guess.
a really interesting question, right? And the more we understand about the neuroscience of our brains, what makes us do things, which lets us control impulses, makes us murderous. There's a guy, Kent Keel, University of Mexico, he's driving around in a big van with an MRI scanner. And he goes from penitentiary to penitentiary, and he images the brains of serial murderers, psychopathic murderers. Okay. And he's getting things that are pretty systematically different about the brain. The question is, what does that mean? Does that mean those people are prone to do it for reasons early environment or gene didn't that happen? If that's the case. Do you forget different moral code, legal code as we discovered the brain basis? Or is that irrelevant? What counts as the action? So this is kind of thing you could think about, maybe discuss in your section some. The more we understand about the human brain, the more we'll understand about behavior. Terrible. What does that mean about legal and moral decisions, about how to punish those? So that's coming in your lifetime, because there's steady progress on this. How to think about that is a big question.
Yes, I mean, the problem nowadays, if the question itself is being asked to get an answer, is nowadays we are still developing and we are still finding a lot of times, so to speak, coincidences and similar things like that to justify actions in the individuals, not from the real interest of bringing light to the events that happen, but more like to save anybody from the legal system. So the legal system itself gives everybody the possibility of, as long as they can put a case strong enough for them to justify their actions in a manner in which they end up also avoiding the highest kind of contempt. It is very possible for anybody to kind of develop these tools and kind of to never feel like they are really responsible, so to speak. Because it is true that when you talk about individuals, you accept and you see and you let, so to speak, the reality itself be manifest of a lot of reasons are present because of indirect control about the individual. As it was said here, if a random, so to speak, tumor, if a random event that should have no correlation shows that this particularity happened in the life of those who exerted their actions, you start to integrate them in a more, so to speak, accepting way because they give you a justified reason as to why it happened. Yet, even if it is true, I wouldn't truly say it, and I wouldn't truly feel like, so to speak, the brain has any kind of necessity of feeling like that, Mostly because I will kind of see and I will kind of um, portray the idea itself of the morality of the morality of the people, or even more of the persons who undergo these kind of processes, is not limited to the events themselves, let's say, because you can notice and you can, even if it isn't completely apparent to you, if you start feeling wrong, I will say, in the highest sense of accountability, if you start feeling wrong about the things that are happening, and if you start feeling like everything is not okay, you should, at the very least, tell others what is it that you're feeling. Because in the case of the example of, because a brain tumor was developing in the head of somebody who thrown their wife out of a window, it doesn't completely justify what happened. It is more like, you know, mm, yeah, it gives them, so to speak, a reason that probably was ignored at first. Because I don't think anybody does not feel anything new inside of them. And even more, um, so to speak, a well developed human will not feel that they have something different inside of them. The perspective should be one in which we engage and we let, so to speak, the individuals really be themselves and really not have so much control over, no, kind of the opposite, have so much more control over their lives because it is necessary and because it is important to not negate the realities themselves of these individuals, as they might as well be noticing that things are changing inside of them. Not that we should not pay attention to these details in the sense of justice, kind of the opposite. Because we are searching for a real justice, if you are not paying attention to those minor details and how sometimes people change, you will never find the light, let's say. mm, if it makes any sense at all. But well, continue. And also, hello, Avicenna. Mm,
So I'm going to talk with you today about research in psychology. And a funny thing about psychology, and I'll come back to this, is everybody is an amateur psychologist. They have to be. If you deal with people, you're an
mm,
amateur psychologist. Moreover, we live in a world with Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil, right? So in case you're only an amateur one, you hear all kinds of stuff, newspaper, internet, magazines, everywhere you go, friends will tell you stuff about psychologists have found this, psychologists have found that, right? So you have your own intuitions to deal with people in everyday life. And here's a kind of a sentence from Time magazine, that drives psychologists crazy if you take it seriously. So here's a literal sentence. Almost half of children of divorces enter adulthood as worried, underachieving, self-deprecating, and sometimes angry young men and women. Okay, so that sounds kind of like a psychological study of some kind of, right? Somebody who wants to argue about the importance of divorce and breakdown of the family. This is the kind of thing. So let's think about this for a moment. Almost half of children of divorce enter adulthood as worried. You guys are worried about global warming? Worried about peace in the Middle East and how that influences?
what's
Are you worried about an economy that may not a little? Okay, who's not worried a little bit of the time? So so it doesn't even tell you what the half of children in the world, for example, are who come from families without divorce. That's the only relevant question. It's not are people worried about stuff. Underachieving compared to what? How would you prove somebody's underachieving scientifically? Okay? I mean, most of you probably have had days where you've underachieved, days where you've achieved pretty well. But how would you measure and prove that? Self-deprecating. Well, sometimes we think it's actually kind of nice if a person's modest. Okay, what's the difference between modest and self-deprecation? And I like this one. Sometimes angry young men. Right? It's are you sometimes angry about something or another? Okay, and if you are, does that tell us that society is breaking down and your parents did something bad? That you're sometimes who is a human being sometimes angry? So here's a kind of psychology-sounding sentence on a serious
mm,
topic, which is what is divorce? Consequences of divorces in family. Or should we be thinking about things that encourage marriages to stay stable and things like that? But there's really no information at all. So from a research or science perspective. So I'm going to talk about a little bit, just reminding you what science is. We're at a university, obviously, that thinks about science and does science all the time.
yes or no? I think there is kind of a notion, so to speak, in the background that needs to be part of the process of finding, so to speak, coincidences. Because, wait, just a second. Avicenna, we are right now watching lecture 2 of the MIT 900 course, Introduction to Psychology. It isn't that much of a reaction, it is more like I watch it and I stopped to analyze what was said. It isn't really a reaction, it is a learning material that we are reviewing, so to speak. Mm, Not simple reactions, if we have to give it a name. And well, I guess I should, as I probably forgot to do, let me leave this over here and let me pin it. Yes, and there it is, pin. Manually on pin, yeah. Okay, there it is. And also, hello, get back. Yeah, we are back to this. We have spent already 9 minutes of the video being watched. So far, we have a new question that has arisen, and I don't really know if it is an interest, not an interesting, a very logical question. But hello, Kendrick, welcome. I I hope you're having a great day. I hope you can enjoy your time zone, wherever whatever it is that you do. So far, mm, we have had a great time so far. That is all I can say properly. But well, the question itself was something like, in the argument of, so to speak, the mind and even more the whole correlation that exists in the reality themselves of the individuals who tend to, so to speak, group up multiple things and even more, go over different realities. In in this case particular, the realities that are pertaining to those who are um, kids that come from unmarried, no, not unmarried, divorce marriages. In these cases, an statement as sometimes these people tend to be sad, and even sometimes they tend to be, so to speak, really angry at the world. I think the manner in which they are talking about something like the way in which this was presented felt kind of derogatory because it is true that there is no real study. But I do not think, and that was my argument, if a baby watches, so to speak, mm, a ball fall from the sky and it says, "Wow, this ball fell from the sky," there shouldn't be a necessity of doing an a scientific investigation about this reality because it is something that you can see on the nature itself of the environment in which you live. I think it shouldn't be. Yeah, I don't know if the way in which we are deciding to automatically disregard everything that is said by someone who didn't do proper scientific research, and not to take it as the most important nor the most revealing threat, but rather as simply another thing that might as well be considered. In that sense, I think it shouldn't be, or it shouldn't make sense to disregard anybody's opinions just because we feel like what they are saying does not make any sense at all, I guess. But at the same time, mm, from a psychology standpoint, I guess, well, it is more like philosophical than psychological that you automatically start attacking whatever is said to you by somebody else because you really create in others the necessity to be able to back up whatever they are saying with the, so to speak, the strongest words and arguments and the strongest cases that can be made come to fruition through, so to speak, the investigation and the completely scientific way, so to speak, because nobody else beats real events more than those events being written down, let's say. But at the same time, I don't know. I wanted to specifically argue this one because it is true that there isn't a basis for that, but at the same time, or not that there isn't a basis, there is not a research or a scientific research. Wow, but there is a basis for that, and if you, as I said before, you can see it from outside, why should you need to go over through the whole process when you can simply air out your opinion? What is the point of attacking an opinion like that so harshly? I mean, if it wasn't true, I could understand it, but with quote unquote coincidences like the ways in which kids that come from unmarried no, for divorce marriages end up being is not so simple as to, let's say, automatically think that what was said in this particular argument is wrong. I think, but anyways, I don't know. I don't know. Let's say let's see how it keeps arguing this, or if it decides to change, because that is also something funny that it out of nowhere decides to change topic.
Remind you what an experiment is, a very brief history of psychology experimentation, then walk you through a few experiments that I find kind of interesting, and then some topics related to psychology. So let me start with this. How do you know what is true? That you take to be true. What is the answer? Everyone's looking at like, how do I know? Please tell me. Okay. Well, when people try to analyze this, and you can think about it for your own self, one of them is authority. Parents, teachers, textbooks, scientists, professors, and courses tell you this is the truth. And if you remember the truth correctly, you get an A. So, authority is a huge source. I mean, right? It would be costly to go around and kind of have your own idea about everything. 12 inches in a foot. I'm not taking that piece of information without skepticism, right? I mean, you couldn't lead your life without kind of believing a lot of stuff, but you don't want to believe everything, right? Just because you hear it, repetition with tenacity. You hear something often enough, and people tend to believe stuff. A priori, what's reasonable? You think things through just by thought. What's possible, rational, and so on. And then maybe a fourth brand of knowledge to something is scientific analysis. We have hypotheses and we test them in some version of experiments, or at least correlations among. Now, there's another view, which is kind of that whatever we think makes something science is what the scientific community decides as a community, right? Roughly speaking, that is the mainstay of faculty at places like MIT and Harvard and so on, and around the world at universities tell you this is how science works. You go, okay, that's how science works. I remember some years ago there was a lot of excitement about a empirical article written by a scientist where he said, oh, this is all just societal authority. The scientists tell you what's true, just they believe in it. Sports writer says the Celtics are the best. You don't really think that the sports writer knows scientifically the Celtics are the best, right? Okay. So and he wrote a paper saying that gravity is simply a consensus among scientists and a particular view they're foisting on society. Okay. But none of us would want to really go up there and jump out the window going, well, gravity is one person's opinion, and here's my opinion, right? Okay. But it's kind of interesting because for those of you who go to medical school, for example, you learn lots of procedures under the medical community true with not much scientific evidence behind it, but they have to use it today. So, you're used to hearing about a scientific method. It applies to psychology in many ways, just like it applies to chemistry, physics, or biology. We have to test things that are falsifiable. We have to deal in probabilities of outcomes, statistics in some sense. The kinds of data we can have are descriptive or correlative or experimental. I'll talk about those in a moment. We are always trying to disprove the null hypothesis statistically, as you know. We can't prove that something is true, but we can prove it's not true. And then finally, like all fields of science, today's most exciting breakthroughs are tomorrow's have to be apologized for, covered, right? Okay. I mean, what makes something breaking science is not that it's known with certainty. What's known with certainty is textbook. What makes something breaking science is forward. So what's the difference between the cutting edge and the bleeding edge is very close.
Wait here. Okay. I think it is a good thing what he said. There isn't really something that deserves to be, so to speak, destroyed, but at the same time, there is also a part of a profession like the, or not a profession, the whole aspect of doing something like psychology in a manner in which you accept that you, as somebody who's constantly appealing to the individual, will need to try new things and will even more need to, so to speak. Also, hello, Masbrok. Sorry. I was watching the video. Hello. I guess, in a sense, it is needed to accept that a lot of times you will also have to go out of what is scientifically proven and will have to try new things. Not because you know if they are going to work or not, but rather because the inner desire to increase the state of beingness and kind of, as it said here, the interest of making a groundbreaking discovery is also there. You cannot simply base your opinions on or your ways to commit to the actions that you are speaking about if you do not, so to speak, stop and analyze what you already have at hand and keep improving on it. If, in a same sense, if humans themselves only had the capacity of, so to speak, using the scientifically correct things, we shouldn't be where we are right now. A lot of times, trial and error done by people who might not even consider themselves scientifics or science advocates is what ends up bringing the state of the whole matter to a better, so to speak, level or to a higher level. But I guess yeah, I don't really find what is the point of saying what is defining truth and what is not defining truth in the sense of what is it that you want to say. Uh, Psychology needs to be completely embedded on more science research instead of being so random or something like that. From now on, I don't see if it is something really useful to the course or more like, well, here is my opinion. Why don't we do it like this starting from now on? I guess, but I mean, it will never not feel weird. So going on, and also again, like thank you for your points towards the barcode. Let me continue.
So here's a cartoon that says he's constantly proving his experiments wrong, okay? And the guy's kind of glum looking over, he's proving the null hypothesis to be correct. Now, that's sort of funny for scientists, but it's sort of funny in the sense that, no, we don't really go around going, I hope with all my heart for this research project I've worked on for the last 5 years that it will prove the null hypothesis. There's no difference between things I'm studying. In fact, scientists, like all humans, have agendas and hopes, like everybody else. So they observe, hypothesize, experiment as data, and it doesn't always go perfectly, right? And the last thing I want to say is I'm going to emphasize today a scientific approach to the human mind and behavior, but of course, there's many other paths of knowledge from philosophy, arts, and so on. There's many things that science cannot address, and I don't want to pretend. That's not a problem too much when you think about chemistry. It's kind of an interesting problem when you think about psychology, because when we think about happiness or values or things like that, those topics cut across psychology and things like religion, philosophy, and topics like that. So what makes something an experiment is you have to have sort of two things conceptually, especially the dependent variable, what you measure, the outcome, and the independent variable, what you vary. Once you have those things in an experiment, you're kind of an experiment in a broad sense. So in psychology, it took a long time. It wasn't until the 1800s that people had kind of an approach to experiments in psychology and figuring out, for example, how to use the simple measurement of time to measure how long a mental operation lasts. That's pretty cool. If you were to come to a fifth grader and say, how would you measure not a brick or a stone, but how long a thought takes, you'd say, well, that'd be pretty hard. But it turns out it's not as hard in a simple way. So Wilhelm Wundt, who big figure in psychology, first textbook in psychology, first laboratory in psychology, did the following test of mental chronometry, simply measuring how long it takes you to do things. So he would show you a light, and he'd simply press the button, and that would take about 25th of a second. And then he would say, instead, you do this. If the light turns on and it's red, you push one button, and if it's green, you push another. So his idea was your motor system to push the button is about the same. The time to observe the light is about the same. But the difference between these, how long it takes to make a choice, how long it takes to make a choice. And that difference, when he subtracts them, took about a tenth of a second. So all of a sudden, you could start to measure in an objective sense how long operation. Then psychology went a lot of different directions. A famous one from Titchener, who worked with Wundt, developed the psychology department at Cornell, was introspection. Look inside yourself and think very carefully when you think about a topic. How do I think about it? That lost its way as a scientific method. The trouble is, one person thinks one way and one person thinks another way, and you can't really settle it, right? So it's introspection about your thoughts is a private process. It's not a public measure that you can exchange among scientists. Time or measure. But we still introspect a lot when we think about psychology, whether it feels right to us, what are the questions to ask. It's still just being human. You can't help but introspect about psychology topics. In the US, there was a sort of a huge response to introspection as being too loosey-goosey. One famous name in this is John Watson. He said the mind is observable, so we can only study behavior, things that people do, actions they take. Their mouth moves, their hand buttons, presses, and then we identify what in the environment influences behaviors. The principles of the mind should be similar between animals and humans. Only thing responsible experimental scientists can do is relate environmental factors to actions. And so there's a stimulus, and you control the stimulus as a scientist. There's a response, you measure the response. That's your psychology experiment. And then the 1980s became the cognitive revolution. Partly this path led to after a while, to not very interesting science. That was the biggest problem. And people said, no, we can make inferences about the mind that translates what it hears or sees. So ideas of representations or knowledge in the mind or in the brain later on, and how that translates what's out there, how you act upon it. So I'll remind you a couple more things, and we'll get to specifics. So correlations are, you can only get in an experiment, right? We have an independent variable. Correlations you can look at all the time. Experiments allows us to infer causation. So let's.
Okay. I guess it is very interesting then to see, first and foremost, the acceptance of psychology not being only part of a science thing. It was better than what I expected, because it was feeling very like, oh yeah, we need to have more science. We need to be the most scientific thing in the world for a second. But it feels great to go back to more real approach, because I guess in a sense it is unavoidable to accept that individuals will invariably think about their work, and you cannot disregard that part of the people when you are trying to take an approach to them, in which you might as well start disrupting the ways in which they see things. And this way in which we say see does not come from simply the process of, so to speak, observing, but rather also the process of narrating it to oneself in our minds, let's say. So very, very fine to see at the very least that it is kind of accepted now, or it is finally not simply disregarded, the reality itself, that there are also completely subjective parts to the process because we might never completely understand, as long as we do not develop the tools for that, how a human thinks and how, more specifically, each person does the act of thinking, let's say. But we can still try to influence those based on, so to speak, mm, generalistical ways in which we address the problems. Because we have, and I think that is kind of a gift due to having so much people doing the same thing over and over again, in the sense of mm, psychology researchers, we also have at hand the possibility of analyzing ourselves with this interest of finding more correlations and more ways to solve the problems that we have at hand, let's say. Because you might never know how a complete stranger is going to think and to rationalize a loss, but you can at the very least say or think that you know how you do it because you can analyze yourself in that sense. So I guess, mm, yeah, it was better than what was feeling before this whole clarification part. But well, we might as well continue. I think no real much else to add so far. I think did I miss anything? No, nothing. I think so. Well, continue.
Take an example that when I read it struck me as slightly relevant. So age of parent and risk for disease in a child. So most of you are young enough that you're not too worried about this yet, and you know. But for those of us who are in my generation and some generation back, many people are postponing childbirth as they do their careers and complete different tasks. And they're getting older, and parents are getting older. No, they don't only seem old; they are old. So it's the case statistically that the older the mother is, the higher the risk of Down syndrome. So the statistics are if a mother's age 20 to 24, it's very rare to have Down syndrome, and the number goes up dramatically. So this is a simple observation measurement, but it's something a lot of women thinking about and worrying about, and it's a thing on their mind. Up until relatively, men said, "Oh, it's too bad for those women. No problem for us." Right? So you have the movie star, right, who's 90 years old and marries a 20-year-old actress, right? You know that kind of model that you see all the time in the news, because it doesn't matter how old the guy is. Well, it turns out, it does matter, and here's some data for that. So here's the probability of developing schizophrenia, a disease that's typically diagnosed in a person's late adolescence or 20s, depending on the age of the father. And you can see if the father is less than 25, it's 1 out of 140. If the father is in his 50s, it becomes 1 out of 50. Dramatic growth in the likelihood of offspring child having schizophrenia father. Okay? So now, there's a correlation between age and whether a child expresses schizophrenia. So let's guess about the possible causes of that. I can tell you it's unknown. But let's even begin to guess about it.
Mm-hmm.
Ask you to guess about it.
I hope it addresses also the factors that create this.
Yeah, bad sperm, right? Okay, it's not for some reason in some way, and sperm that leads more likely to be risk for schizophrenia. So that's your first intuition, and that may turn out to be right. Something problematic about the sperm from the male. Here's another one though, and this shows you, the challenges with correlational research on something even so important as this, which is how about an alternative, which is who marries later in life? Okay, maybe the desirable men are plucked off the market on average in large statistics by age 30 or something, and a bunch of us, and I'm a late marrier, limp to find some woman around the world who will accept us. Okay, and finally, out of pity, some woman says, "Okay, drag yourself into your 50s, and I'll take you." Right? Because it's not random, probably. And we're averaging over many people, but it's not random, probably, who marries at 25 in a given society and who marries. Not random. It could be big differences among them. Okay, and how could we tell that difference? Maybe it's nothing to do with the sperm. Maybe it's something to do with something about the gene environment that goes with being a parent in the 50s. Completely different explanation. Someday maybe we'll know, but we don't know now. All right. So this is the limits of correlations, and both could be true. Neither could be a third story altogether. So that was about me.
Okay, wait. Then I guess another thing that appears in my mind is the idea itself of how much you can also are going or not to accept that sometimes events through the lives of people is what create these particular events, so to speak, or these what is it? These results, let's say, mm, because you can accept that okay, if if the father is older than X amount of years, what was it, 40 years, the kid will have an increased probability of developing, what was it, schizophrenia. Yes, it is true. But at the same time, it does not negate, on the other hand, and I like to say it because I read it, not because I invented that in my mind, because I read it on professional research, that it is also proven that other parts of the life of kids end up making them, so to speak, mm, also develop these brain diseases, if we're going to call them something. Because schizophrenia is not only something that appears when one thing goes wrong, it is a collection of different events happening. Maybe they never noticed, but when you decided, or you not decided, you had the misfortune of dropping your child when it was 3 weeks old directly into the ground, and it hit its head so hard that it almost made a breaking noise. Maybe at that point something happened. Maybe if you are an abusive father or an abusive, so to speak, take caretaker of those childs, and you think it is okay to hit them, and it is okay to abuse the mind of somebody so to speak, incredibly incapable of defending themselves, it also starts to appear there. Maybe if even if you're not trying to directly make any harm on the kids, maybe if you expose them too much to negative parts and even more to negative realities, it also might as well start appearing them, as it also happens, for example, with depression and with the whole side of being more open, being more close. It isn't only something that is already de- determined only by genes. It is a more holistic collection of things that create these results. In particular, even more so, something so drastic. It is kind of, let's say, as if out of nowhere you only took age as a measure for the development of cancer. It isn't psychology, but you can as well do it that way, and you can say it is almost impossible to have cancer if you're 20 years old or younger, when in reality, if you're exposing yourself to situations, to radiation, to things that tend to make cancer appear in the body, you cannot avoid it, no matter how old you are. I mean, it is almost the same here. There are other causes, not only the age or more well seen or already proven parts of the reality, I think. I don't know. Let's see.
My becoming a parent late in life and marrying late in life. Let's talk about you, all right? Let's talk about the level of stress you have and how empathetic you are on average, your college generation relative to one's 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. So let's ask that question. Why would people want to know such a thing? Well, you might want to understand, what pressures are we putting young people under? Go through grade school, high school, college. What's the world like? Is it pretty much the same? Is it pretty much changing? Uh, you know, now, how would we figure that out? How would we begin to measure? It's a very simple question. Are you more stressed than people 10 years ago at MIT, on average across the country? And are you more or less empathetic towards other people? How might one
That's
answer that kind of
subjective.
question? Yeah. That would be a very interesting path. It's a tough research path, but you're right. If we had some biological signature of stress, that would be a good one. But let's ask this question. Let's say I measured everybody in here and got your average stress hormone, something like that. Now, what's my answer about whether 10 years ago people were more or less stressed? Yeah.
I agree.
That would be an outcome. Yeah, that would be sadly an extreme outcome of stress of a kind. But there's a lot of things that go in. Okay, so we have to worry about two things. one thing we know is, let me ask you another one. You could compare your level of stress to people who are 10 years older than you or 20 years older than you. What do you think about that? No. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, being more accurate is want to know for
Yeah, because maybe people at 20 or maybe people who are 30 or 40 are more stressed for other reasons because they have more bills and mortgages to pay, or less stressed for other reasons or whatever, right? Maybe that's not about the generation you're in. Maybe it's about being a person with more responsibilities at 40, right? Okay, so here's, for some things you get some luck, and you have it in your hand. So here's an emotional health questionnaire where students across the country for the last 25 years have been given the identical questionnaire. It's not a biology measure, about their self-reported measure of stress. And this was on the New York Times just a few weeks ago. It's you guys, on average, across the country, US college students, are at an all-time high level. Sorry about that. Yeah. So now it's not the perfect measurement in every way, but it's the same questionnaire to college students year in and year out. By self-report, people say, I feel more stressed. You can also see that there's a difference between men and women. Women, on average, report feeling more stressed. And it may be relevant that on average, for example, there's a higher rate of depression among much higher rate of autism among men than women. So it's not a being one sex or the other is not a of avoiding mental health challenges. But so you're more stressed than ever. Okay, good luck. We'll try to do the best we can in this course to not make that way worse. But it's something to think about. I got a call the other day from somebody who said there's a lot of curiosity about whether the shift from book learning and book reading to internet worlds, Twitter and Facebook worlds, are fundamentally changing how people. And that sounds kind of possible. And there are people who give amazingly entertaining lectures about these things. Scientifically, it's hard to imagine how we. So when I get an occasional phone call like, what do neuroscientists know about that? What could they know about it? Is that even an answerable question? If I take you now and say, well, you've probably done more Facebook than a 50-year-old, and compare you to a 50-year-old on some other thing, is that going to answer the question of how you think about ideas, given the world you live in, versus the world that 50-year-olds lived in? No. So there's just a lot of huge, deep things about changes in the world that we can't even begin to get at. Sometimes we get lucky at people giving some particular measure for some time. Empathy, by self-report, and now I wouldn't fill it out now, but you can take a look just to get a feeling at your leisure. This is the questionnaire they used for self-reported empathy. It's self-report. 40% lower today than 20 years ago. Yeah. So on average, you guys, literally on average by these measures, are more stressed and less empathetic towards others. Okay. And those, sorry. Okay. So, and those things, this is not an individual, this is an average, right? So at the level that society operates, things are going on and moving for some reason. By the way, I can tell you that when I'm stressed, I have less room to be empathetic. Okay? So maybe these things are related. If you're feeling stressed, your first thought is not how can I help others, but like how can I just get through the day? Okay. So these things might be related. So let's turn a little bit to experimentation.
Okay, then my question is, or well, I don't know if it is a question. The point that I am trying to get to is, first and foremost, why is it that before we kind of shamed the times and now we are using their measurements so freely? I only that I wanted to say, no more delving, because it already felt kind of weird to see that they were used in this particular instance, but I guess it happens. I guess it is a possible thing to see or something like that. I don't really know so far. Aside from that, the other thing is how much it also changes the ways in which we describe ourselves. Because I think about it like this. Then nowadays, kid tends to be or tends to have more roles and more proofs of what they are doing and how they are doing it compared to others. For example, I don't think it is that normal to have a religion inside of every household, but at the same time, it is very normal to ask, or yeah, it is very proven that the majority of population nowadays knows what the concept of a god is, even if it isn't the most developed one. They have a basic notion and they have a very basic understanding about this compared to what it was before. In that same sense, for example, continuing with that, if you do not only have the example of God, you also have the example in this particular Christian religion, the example of Jesus Christ, somebody who did the most, so to speak, benevolent things and completely selfless things. You also can compare yourself to that. And if more people, more kids develop the ability to do it in a manner in which they see that they will almost never be able to do the same things as somebody who dedicated their whole life for the sake of uh, for the pursuit of a greater goodness. How can you say that they are going to rate themselves better than these examples that they more and more have present and more see in other places? I don't think it is as simple as saying, yeah, you might as well be more depressed and you might as well be less empathetic. There are other sides to this whole investigation, and even more, I think it doesn't completely negate the side, but at the same time, it still gives something to see, and that is how much you're going to take something that you tried to discredit before now as true, I guess. But well, continue.
Um, and some of the challenges of relating psychology to real world policies that are meant to make the world better or safer in some way. So there's a famous broken window theory from the political scientist James Wilson, the criminologist George Killing, and their idea was this: that especially in neighborhoods that are not immaculately kept, say the other way, where there's a lot of damage around you, things like broken windows is the phrase they used, that this promotes in people who live in that community or work around that community a sense that the rules don't count. Anybody can do anything. And then it fosters the growth of petty crimes. And once you do a petty crime, you're more vulnerable or willing to do a major crime. A slippery slope, okay? And in fact, Rudy Giuliani and Commissioner Bill Bratton employed this. They asked the police to write lots of tickets, lots of sort of minor arrests for things where people weren't upkeeping the environment or where they were littering or things like that. And this is a huge debate because in a police department, you can only do so much. So if they have a person working on jaywalking and littering, that's a person not working on crime rings. Okay, so they're trying to make a choice where they think make cities safer in the most effective way. And the crimes went way down in New York. In most cities now, don't hear crime discussed as a big topic nationally. In some local areas, like in Boston, some specific areas you do. I don't think in the State of the Union there was a word about crime that I could. Not a big national topic. In some local places, it is a big topic, but not nationally. So you don't know. Some years ago, when people said New York City was a horrible place to go because there was so much crime, that you walk out from your airplane and get mugged before you made it to your taxi. No, it was, it was like the whole country was saying big cities were just crime-ridden and dangerous. They do this policy, things get better, right? Everybody said, that sounds pretty good, but of course it's not an experiment; it's a real-life policy. And then people had these kind of, incredibly clever reinterpretations of why crime went down. So the wildest one was in Freakonomics, was discussed in that, which said, well, abortion was legalized in 1973. That gave women who didn't have access to legal abortions the ability to have them. That the children, on average, in these communities that had at least access to safe and legal abortions would be poor, unstable, addiction-ridden communities statistically. And that if you imagine the reduced abortion rate in poor areas could, when you count out the number of possible criminals in those areas, account for the reduction in crime all by itself. A completely different interpretation that has nothing to do with the policy. It just said we're going to have a demographic shift, which will have a weird, unexpected consequence, lowering the crime rate, because it's the finding that young men in particular are most likely to engage in violent criminal activities. Not all rule, but a statistical average. Or there was a big crack epidemic that reduced, or lots of states put in laws that put people into jail for much higher, longer periods, much more severe penalties with new drug laws. So it's very hard to know if the policy that was initiated really worked, or whether completely other things were happening that moved the crime rates. And here's some very sort of perverse or other explanations. So that left the question: is broken windows even a good idea? Just because Harvard, and we know Harvard is always right, but just because a Harvard psychologist says pretty interestingly, that sounds right to me, is that even a right idea? Okay, so let's take a step back. Can we test that experimentally? So here's the experiment. And the idea is, again, that when people observe that others violate a social norm or legitimate rule, are they more likely to violate it? If you see people around you breaking rules, are you more likely to do it? And you could say, it seems like it is, but let's do the science.
Okay, here then, because it is the railing, I wanted to say, then should it be tested? If you want to see what was the best or the major contributor factor to reducing something, shouldn't it be in your interest to test in which ways it happened? Like, we are going to reinstate some policies around this and around that, and we are going to remove some laws that, as they said, for example, we are going to remove some laws that made committing crimes related to drugs and drug addiction and all of that be less harsh on the individuals. Shouldn't it be a concern of the people basically to see how much it happened or not? And for example, start changing once again, going back to okay, you can now do as you want. You can break a window, you can break a car window, you can start robbing people in the street, and nobody's going to say anything. Shouldn't you try to see what was the cause of that instead of simply trying to ask the air almost? Because I don't think you're going to get a response from the the existence itself or the problem that was already solved, because you even more in such a broad way to resolving it, you don't have only one thing to kind of address and to say yes, this one in particular was the reason, therefore we do not even have to worry as to why it happened, because the most important thing is that it did happen, therefore we are happy with what is going on, and we are going to keep doing it. No, you cannot really say it like that. I think there is not a real way to measure things so easily and so measly, let's say. But wait, I don't know. Let's see.
So here's an independent measure. I'll show you the environment. The dependent measure is the number of people who perform a violation. Now, you can't go getting people murdering each other and stuff for an experiment, but you can do this. You can have two conditions. So in the top condition, do you ever go back to your car or bike, usually it's cars, I think, and they put leaflets in your car? And now what are you going to do? You're running away. There's a leaflet on your windshield wiper. So they put it out, and they either had a wall like this, which was clean. There's a sign that says no graffiti, and they put on those white pieces of paper onto the bikes, or they put a lot of graffiti on the wall, okay? And people came out from their classes. They went into classes. They parked their bike. They ran into class. They came out, and they got all these white leaflets. What they did is watched. They said, how many people put the leaflet away? How many people crumpled it up and threw it right on the ground? Okay? So we don't know what they're going to do with the leaflet if they put it away, but we could hope they're going to throw it out. One thing we know for sure, if you crumple it up and throw it on the ground, it's littering and not a good social norm. And sure enough, a third of the people littered if the wall had no graffiti, but it more than doubled if the wall had graffiti. So that's a small thing. That's not a broken down, complicated neighborhood. But just at that moment, as you roar out of class, you get that piece of paper on your bike, and you see like, wow, this is a pretty crummy place. People are breaking the rules all the time. Twice as likely to throw a piece of paper on the ground. So that shows that people very easily are influenced by very mild perceptions of whether people are following the rules or not. Either better selves or their worse selves, depending on that sense of, are all rules on or are all rules off? And there's a pretty good bet they're not thinking about it, right? They're not thinking, they're saying there, okay, here's here's littering, not as bad as killing somebody, all right? Here's the wall. Well, there's 30% graffiti. I mean, nobody does that. They have an emotion, quick response, but the environment makes a difference in that regard. So an important thing about studies like this. So let me tell you about this one. Here's a study to look at a drug that was supposed to lower mortality from coronary artery disease. So those who took the drug, 80% or more, because people follow whether you take a drug. If you don't take the drug, of course, the drug won't work. I had a 15% mortality rate within 5 years. Those who took the drug less than 80% had a 25% mortality. So you'd say, well, 10% better chance of living for 5 years. That's worth it, right? The nice thing is they had a placebo, and there was no difference whatsoever. Those who took the active drug, those who took the difference is between those who followed the instructions to take the pill, those who didn't. So what does that mean? How do you interpret that? Not the drug. Yeah. It could be that. It could be the stress. It could be that. Let me make a guess. There's no scientific answer to this. People who tend not to follow instructions, are they mostly stressed by not following instructions? No. Mostly the intuition is they're blowing it off. They're like, yeah, that's the instructions, but I got things to do and places to go. But you could be right. So anyway, the idea is what you pick up are people who try to take care of themselves. They have a health condition, and the people who are following the pill instruction are probably also doing the best they can in terms of exercise, diet, all the things they could do to maximize their health, right? Okay, and they're taking their placebo or they're taking the drug, they don't know, right? But they're doing everything they can. And the people who are blowing off stuff, they're the ones who are doing all the things that aren't healthy, including not even taking your pills. I mean, if you don't even take your pills, right? I mean, exercise is work, diet is work, popping a pill that's been handed to you that you're told might help you is probably not that much work. So,
Okay, I think here we might as well go back to the notion of, but okay, the problem isn't the people who takes or not takes the drugs, perfect, and what is your responsibility as the one who is giving them those drugs? How much are you going to accept that you might as well have to give them a real motivation? You cannot expect anybody out of nowhere to have an interest and even more to feel like doing it every single day of their lives. How is it that you are going to accept and even more to disregard the responsibility that lies in your hands as the one who is trying to prove something correct or not if you're not even going to go, so to speak, all out on those who are around you? How is it that you can really expect people to change? How is it that you can really expect others to develop a tool to have a sense of importance over the things that you're trying to give them or similar? When you yourself are not even doing it, you simply give them an instruction, give them a pill, and you fuck off almost. Who is it then that has the problem or that holds the solution itself in that sense? I mean, it is easy to say, yeah, because if people is or is not paying attention, and also, sorry, welcome, Colin. We were so far going over the second lecture of MIT psychology. Continuing with what I was saying, I think if you disregard your responsibility, yeah, then you know what? It is easy to say, yeah, the problem is that these people do not understand how important it is. How the fuck do you want them to understand it if you do not really implant into their brains that idea? How do you want anybody to have a desire to keep living if you do not show them that possibility? How do you want others, let's say like this, to get anywhere if you kind of not even prove that they could do it by themselves? What is the point then? What do you expect to happen if you yourself are not creating and cultivating that same thing with your own intentions? Because, yeah, as I said before, it is completely easy to disregard whatever happened by their fault. Because, yeah, at the end of the day, at the very least, you gave them the pill, you gave them the message, and you disappeared. You only control if they follow that or not. But it isn't as simple as saying, I think, yeah, they didn't follow these rules, therefore they didn't have any hope at all, they are going to die anyways. What? What? Anyways, continue.
So it's what's called self-selection bias, that you stand out if you tend to take care of yourself or not. Um, okay. So when we run experiments at universities that involve people, a huge issue for us is the idea is this, that we randomly recruit people. And we'll come back to this in a moment. Then we randomly assign them to one condition or another. For example, the placebo condition or the drug condition. We randomly assign them to the messy wall or the clean wall. We discover something, and then we try to generalize it as far as we can to people as a whole. We've discovered something fundamental about how humans, generalizable principles of human mind and behavior. What really happens in the world? And it's always you're in between sort of the best possible world and the world we actually live in. So is it really random who participates in research studies in psychology departments? A lot of the research gets done. Is it really random? No. Okay. So who volunteers? Have any of you volunteered to be a subject in an experiment anywhere? Yeah. Okay. So but it's not random. It's some people they either need to make a few bucks, or they're very curious about psychology, or they have a friend who's in psychology, or it's not random. And in fact, population-wide, people have said that psychology can be described as weird research for the following reason: that the vast majority of the findings you'll read about everywhere, including in your textbook, but everywhere, are from nations that are westernized, educated, industrialized, and relatively rich democracies. Okay? The vast majority are between 17 and 25. They're undergraduates or graduate students. It's been estimated if you're a US college student, you're 4,000 times more likely to show up in a scientifically reported experiment if you're a person anywhere else on the planet, okay? 4,000 times. Because why? Because it's changing a little bit, but for many, many years, a huge amount of research happened in the US at universities, pretty much at better universities, pretty much at highly selected, right? So and then we never publish that. We never say, MIT students did the following things. People say, yeah, MIT students, because then we have a different report from Stanford or from UMass or from Michigan or Texas. We say, no, humans did an experiment, and humans are like this. So, and that can make us, it's just something to think about as you see studies and stuff like that. And people are more and more sensitized to that. As more and more of the world gets somewhat industrializes, there's more and more research around the world, but still the vast majority of findings are you guys. Okay. Now, that's just to start with who's in the subject pool or participant pool. how normal are you when you do an experiment? In other words, are you like yourself, or are you doing weird stuff? And people use this idea that you're really weird when you do an experiment in another sense, because like you don't know what's going on, you're following instructions, you know. So they do experiments to show how ridiculously people behave when they're doing an experiment like they would never do it. So they ask them to come in and they say, would you fill out 200 sheets of paper filled with random digits, add them pairwise, and just I'll come back in a few hours. Now, if a friend asks you to do that, add random digits for a couple hours. He was like, no, thank you. I've got about 8 million better things to do than that, right? I could multiply random digits to start with. Right? So, but people will do it for hours because they're in this weird, like, I'm gonna, you know, that's the instruction and that's what my mission is. Or even more ridiculous, they pick up a card after each page. They've added all these numbers, you know, for no good reason. And the instruction tells them, when you've done the page, tear the page up into 32 pieces. And here's the next page. Okay, the next page. It's obviously fruitless and pointless, ridiculously so. But because you're in an experiment and somebody told you to do that, right? You just keep barreling forward. So, you know, how much are we who we are when we do experiments versus people following weird instructions? And we'll come back to that in some serious context. That's the subjects. How about experimenters? Experimenters are never objective. We try to be, as scientists, as objective as we can. We're never, you know, we believe certain hypotheses. We have certain goals. We recognize results that would be super exciting. We recognize okay, we're humans too. We want to do stuff that matters. We want to do stuff that people reward us for. I mean, it's just human. So here's a lowest case example of how once you're an experimenter, you produce results. Believe me, it's much more when your result matters for things like your career advancement or your status in the field. So students were told that rats were either maze bright or maze dull. They were told that these rats were bred to be smart learners or not so smart. The rats were all just random rats, okay? It's a fake story to undergraduates. Then they had them on a test on a maze, and they said, for your laboratory exercise, write down how quickly the rat runs, okay? And amazingly, the smart rats did way better than the dull rats, okay? Now, these are not students trying to become famous or have a career. They're handing in an assignment, okay? And how did that happen? Well, they went back, and it wasn't that anybody faked it or anything like that, but when they looked at films or discussed stuff with kids, students in the course, every little thing students did that moved the data, little tiny, tiny ways, always favored finding the maze bright rats and being brilliant runners. So, for example, you know, they would put the rat. If you've ever run a rat in a maze, has anybody run a rat in a maze? Yeah, is it easy? If you pick them up and put them in the maze, that's when they're more automated now. Is it physically easy? Are rats like, please, show me the starting line. I'm ready to go? No. What are they like? Help me out here for you guys who've done this. Are they kind of really and they don't like to be handled that much, really. No, even ones in they're fighting, and these are undergraduates who've hardly ever touched a rat. Okay, they're like, please don't attack me or something. So they're holding it up, and the rat's fighting back. And because it's really uncomfortable, the rat's really unhappy, and the student's like, really, you know. So what happens is, and then they plunk the rat down, and they, oh my gosh, it's facing the wrong direction, and it's a smart one. Wait, let's stop the clock. Let's get him, you know. But if it's a dull one facing the wrong direction, it's okay. It's a dull one. Let the maze. So lots of little things. Are you sure you wrote this down? Was it 12 seconds or 11? Guess it was 11. Oh, because it's a smart one, okay? So completely innocently, as far as we understand, they made the result to match up with what they.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess that is kind of the sadness of things, because you notice that it does not only happen to some people, something so, let's say, easy as a simple rat doing a maze or resolving a maze. It also has to do with a lot of other things. This same kind of example has been proven true in a lot of other areas. When teachers are told that they have a class full of brilliant students, the ways in which they perform with those students are incredibly higher, and their overall results are also incredibly better than when they are told they have the worst one and they have almost an impossible wall to surmount, let's say. But I don't know, I guess it, it shouldn't simply be something that is said, I think, because it needs, or at least for me, it is interesting to analyze it in a manner in which you see and you try to find a correlation between the ways in which you relate to it and the ways in which you let that happen and the ways in which it also affects the realities themselves of the things that happen in front of you, let's say. Because it is true, let's say, that, okay, if you are more lenient towards one group than the other because you think they are going to do better, how much you could do it if you thought they were the best group, even if it wasn't true, how much you could do it every single time. And what is the point of not believing that all you do in a more broad way will always be of a better result if you always believe what you're doing is for the best of the intentions rather than to think, yeah, you know what, I have to talk with these shitty people. I have to spend my time with these completely stupid individuals. I have to kind of the opposite. Why would you ever believe that somebody has less of a capability on anything if it is already proven and it kind of from the side of the humanistical side, why would you not even try to tell this to others, as it might kind of reveal that the condition people has before doing things is almost completely unrelated to the results that they are going to have, because the most important thing is always the ways in which those who conduct the learning courses, those who teach the lessons, those who do this whole side of the experiment or of life, let's say, are who really determine the whole process of this. You, it is kind of you're giving more credit than what is due to the individuals in that sense, and you're disregarding those who do incorrectly because you might as well not even see and not even think that they are not doing it wholeheartedly, let's say. But I don't know. It was more of a critique than anything at all. Really serious. So let's continue.
And it's not just that. And if you know this example, cognitive psychologists have studied a phenomenon like this. So try this at your desk. Each card is a letter on one side and a number on the other side. Your job is to figure out what's the smallest number of cards you have to pick up to discover if this rule is right. If a card has a vowel on one side, even number on the other side. Think about this for a moment. If a card has a vowel on one side, then it has to have an even number on the other side. What's the smallest number of cards you can pick up? That's the hypothesis. But here's what people have found. The correct answer is E. And about 10% of people, on average, come up with that. Many more people pick E alone or 6. Why? Well, everybody gets that you have to look at E because if it's an even number, right? You flip E over, and if that one turns out to have a vowel, if it has an odd number, that the hypothesis is wrong, right? Everybody gets you should check E. Pretty much everybody gets that J is irrelevant because it's a consonant. Okay. Now comes the interesting 6 and 7. Because the sentence is talking about a vowel and an even number, sometimes people feel, I got to check the even, right? But it doesn't say anything about even numbers couldn't. It doesn't tell you anything. That's not part of the hypothesis. So but if you flipped over number 7 and you discovered a vowel, violate the rule. So what happens is they're tempted to go for things that feel like they confirm the question. It feels like E confirms it, and it feels like 6 confirms it, right? And it's what's called confirmatory bias. When you look at stuff, you see what you think confirms it, then you tend to go for that, even when there's evidence in front of you that could contradict your expectation. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a practical a practical suggestion for how to win somebody over if you have a brewing romantic interest in that person, right? All right. So finally we get practical, right? Everything was like, I'm not running rats, I'm not taking. All right. And I think it's very interesting because I think, when we think about how people make decisions in their lives, we tend to think intuitively about big decisions. Like, what's my career going to be? Where do I go to college? We think those are the big decisions. But a huge amount of life is little decisions. Moment to moment, if somebody asks you for something, say yes or no. Somebody walks up to you at a party. They want to talk with you. Do you feel like talking or not feel like talking? Maybe you talk with them as a lifetime friend or a romantic partner or whatever. So I think we make constantly little decisions that turn out to big lives. So here's some evidence about things like that that influence that. And this is working at Yale. So we describe people as warm, or we can define them as cold or aloof, right? And we could think those words are kind of arbitrary. And most of us, if you met somebody at a party, would you rather hang out with somebody who's warm or cold? Warm. Okay. All right. Just checking that we're okay. Now, sometimes there's an idea of embodied cognition. Here's what it is. You can't really know how warm or cold that person is, or even an abstract idea. But we know we're comfortable when we're kind of warm, and we know we're not comfortable physically inside us when we're kind of cold. There's an idea that when we think about other people's feelings, other people's thoughts, or abstract things in the world, we base them on physical experiences that we have inside. Okay? That there's a more direct link between what we know inside us, and we use that to interpret the world. Embodied cognition, your body, vehicle for understanding things out there. So here's the experiment. It's really clever. There's 2 temperature conditions. So what happens is you go into a building, and the examiner, an undergraduate usually or a graduate student, meets the subject in the lobby, and he's carrying a cup of coffee. Sometimes it's hot coffee, sometimes it's cold coffee. a clipboard, 2 textbooks. Okay, so you can imagine it's a setup, right? Person's walking there juggling with the coffee, the textbook, all the clipboard, right? And he says on the elevator, it says, "Could you just hold my cup while I write down your name on my list of subjects in the experiment?" It's very innocent, right? On the elevator, until you hold a cup of coffee, which half the people get a hot cup, half the people get a cold cup. Then you read a description of a person, just a paragraph, and you have to rate whether you find the person described as warm or cold. And if you had the warm cup of coffee, you're more likely to describe that person as a warm kind of. Okay? Now, these subjects have no idea. They held a cup of coffee. They probably didn't even think whether it was warm or cold. But something in their body that got warmed up to the least degree possible. That thought is still in their head. So when they read a description, somebody go, "Oh, this seems like a warm person." Or if it was a cold cup of coffee, they say, "Oh, this seems like a cold, aloof kind of person as far as I can tell." Right? That little bit of difference. So here's the lesson, just so you got it. If you want to take somebody because you have a possible friendship or romantic interest in that person, are you better off going out for a warm cup of coffee or giving them a cold glass of beer? For that first impression, scientific research shows something warm will work. Now, it's not that powerful. You're not going to be able to control the world, okay? But you know what it says is when we're in ambiguous situations, we first meet somebody, we don't really know them. Little things can start us off on one path, can start us off on another path. Surprisingly little things. Now, then they have to worry about a confound. Can you imagine a confound here? Think of the
Okay, wait. I think I can't really add that much, but in a sense, I see it as it isn't here, but I saw it before. We tend to search for things that make sense out of our own reality, the ones which we live in, let's say. So, if you are going through things and you are experimenting and, so to speak, experiencing things that really kind of give you a sense and give you a meaning and make it, so to speak, be in any way more logical to you and more easy to comprehend, you wouldn't really be worried so much over if it is that way or not uh, on an objective matter, because what you are seeing and what is making sense to you does not completely need to be believable to everyone else. If it were to be true that we needed to only have the most objective consensus, a lot of things wouldn't be like how they are right now, because we do not have that many objective consensus on reality itself. So I guess, yeah, the idea is the ways in which we change our own realities might as well be really affected by our own perceptions. Therefore, we should try to create, or we should try, at the very least, to not be so subjected by our own mind. And if we cannot change it in other people's minds, we might as well try to show them that, you can make it better than what you already thought it was. Or you can not make it better yourself, the reality itself, by simply giving some different paths, let's say, might as well become better than what they already are, because the possibility of changing, in this case, a cold cup of coffee into a hot one is always there. So I guess that I don't really know. I don't really know. Let us continue.
rats.
Also,
Who
¿cómo checar,
knows
no?
if the cup is cold or hot besides the person holding it? The examiner, right? Okay. Now, maybe the examiner doesn't try to do this, but maybe the examiner, no matter what, says, "Oh, we're in the warm condition, and I'm smiling because this is going to be nice. I'm helping this person feel good. And here's the aloof condition. I'm giving it, and we're all going to be miserable." And the examiner knows it because they know if they have a hot or cold cup of coffee. So maybe the person's not vibing to the coffee; they're vibing to the expression or feeling or sentiment of the examiner, right? Who understands what's going on. So they do one more experiment where they have you seen these hot and icy therapeutic packs that you can make hot or cold? Okay. Now somebody else makes it hot or cold. The experimenter has no idea whether it was hot or cold. So what we call double blind. The person doesn't know it's relevant, the experimenter. They rate the pad, and now, this moves a little bit, they either get, after this thing is over, they're told it's a product evaluation of the pad, but they either got a hot pad or a cold pad. And they could either choose to one of two rewards, a Snapple beverage or a $1 gift certificate, whichever you like better. Okay, you have two little things you can do. But here's the big decision. Do you get it for yourself, or we can send it for you to a friend? If the people got a cold pad, 75% of the times they say, "Please give it to me right now, I'll take it." If they had a warm pad, 46% of the majority of the time they actually send it to their friend. That pad difference moved quite substantially the likelihood that you take it for yourself or you give it away. Quite substantial. If you're a charity trying to get people to donate or you want to get help from somebody, 25% success rate is a lot worse than a 54% rate, right? It's a doubling. doubling of whether you keep it for yourself or you're generous. Just that cup of coffee. Well, it's just that therapeutic pad. I'm going to do two more and then go to different. How about money? When you think about money, I don't mean traumatic things about money, just a little bit about money. How does it influence how you relate to other people? Okay, here's the experiment. The idea is that money, on average, when you just think a little bit about it, and I'll show you how ridiculously little about it. They think that their hypothesis is that money makes you think about self-reliance. You earn your money, your bank account, compared to situations where you're not thinking about it. So here's what they did. They had people come in three conditions. And they had to unscramble sentences. You have no idea what's going on, right? You got a sentence like, cold it desk outside is. You would make into a good sentence. Or high a salary desk paying. Okay, so you just make those, you scramble those words around, but the money condition has a word like salary in it. Or you get the neutral sentences that have no money reference, and you see monopoly money in the corner of the room. Okay, so we're not talking like people just sent you your tuition bill, okay, or whatever, or you just found out, that that something terrible happened financially, or you won the lottery. It's monopoly money, okay? It's just like the idea of money in them. All right, okay. And then they give you a task to do. An experimenter, as he or she leaves the room, they say, it's a pretty hard task. You may want some help. So just come and get me. I'm glad to help you. Not a problem. So what happens? Here's the probability of getting help. And it's incredibly more for the control group that did the sentences without money. And way less, not only for the people who unscrambled the sentence for salary, but also way less if they saw monopoly money. The mere idea of money, not money given to you, not financial trauma or financial gain, the mere idea of money makes you less willing to get up and get help. So the positive, it makes you more self-reliant. The negative is people were less willing to help somebody. So now at the end, as the examiner comes in and says, I'm an undergraduate like you. I've got huge pressure to get this paper in. Can you help me code? Can you help me score up a few sheets? Okay. People were twice as much willing to help if they just did the little things. They unscrambled the money, saw the monopoly money. It's just that thought about money goes like, man, okay, self-reliance. We're all in it for ourselves. Okay, I've got my money, you've got your money. Good luck. We're all. Okay. Self-reliance can be a good thing, but it doesn't necessarily go with helping people very much. Also, yeah. It could, yeah. The monopoly money. I agree with you. Maybe that's why they also had the one where you just get the scrambled sentences. Okay, I agree with you. These are all, you can think, there's many, many ways to think about this. Okay, the last example of this kind I want to show you is dating behavior. And the way, again, an experiment can challenge various ideas. So, and this is specifically about dating between men and women. The story, to the extent it's been studied, would be a little bit different if you're dating within a sex. So, for dating between men and women, who is more selective in their dating choices? Who's more willing to date widely, a lot, or less, What's your thought? You have to generalize about, on average. No, okay, thank you. Okay, so an evolutionary psychologist, and I love evolutionary psychology, but it drives me crazy too. Okay? Evolutionary psychologists will go, well, because by evolutionary theory, men have to go and make as many offspring as they can to keep their genes going. Women have to be more selective. It takes 9 months to bear a baby. It takes 9 seconds to do the male part, right? Okay. Estimated. Okay, so so this might or might not be true. It's kind of fun. We all laugh about it. All of a sudden, kind of amusing to sort of think about. But how would we actually know? Vaguely true on average. How would we actually know? And for dating behavior, how would we even? Is that true? Is that a bad myth, bad rap, or whatever? Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. So there's an entire research enterprise out there now that uses online dating sites, which of course is only in the last 20 years or something. So it wasn't before. And the other one that's been a treasure trove of data is speed dating environments, okay, where you can observe things and measure things. And those studies have shown, for example, that online dating, on average, men are 1.5 times more likely to send email offering dates to a woman than the other way around compared to women. And in speed dating, too, men are more likely to be happy to date a person they met than women. So there's objective evidence that this is true on average in this society at this time. And so everybody goes, oh, yeah, this shows the evolutionary psychology. The evolutionary psychology drives you crazy because on the one hand, it's certainly the case that our minds and brains evolved through evolution. Okay, so there's something about the history we went through as a species that matters for who we are now. That's got to be the case. On the other hand, it was a different world before internet dating and speed dating, right? I mean, it's hard to know how those things line up exactly. So here's the fun thing. It turns out that on average in speed dating, a typical speed dating event will have like 4 minutes, right? So we typically have women sitting at desks. It's almost always a setup. And the men are sitting in chairs in front of the desk, and they meet and they talk for 4 minutes. The bell rings, the men jump up, and they shift over one station, right? And then what happens is, for each time you meet a person, you fill out a card that says yes or no, I'd be willing to have a date with a person. You have 2 yeses from the man and the woman. Speed dating organizer changes the information. Does that sound okay? All right. And men make more yes responses. And it turns out it doesn't have to be this way, but almost, from my reading, that almost every speed dating thing has the men rotating around, okay, and the women sitting there waiting for the men to rotate around. So let's just ask this question: what happens if the women rotate? Which almost never happens, but they did this experimentally. They said for half of the speed dating sessions, the men will be sitting at the table and the women will stand up and move a chair over every 4 minutes. Bell rings. The women are moving and rotating. And here's the results. Basically, what's showing on the left are when the men rotate, the standard condition. The first is romantic desire. Men feel more romantic desire on average for the partner they sit with. They feel that more chemistry is happening with the person they sit with. And on the bottom left corner, they also are more likely to give a yes response. I would like a date with this person. But reverse the roles, have the women rotating, and look at these bars. No difference at all. Completely wipe out male-female difference, self-reported romantic desire per person, self-reported chemistry they think is happening, and the yes/no responses that I would have a date. You completely eliminate it, and are flat even. So, what do you? That's the result. What does it suggest? What happened to the evolutionary psychology? It disappeared just by having the women rotate around the room. It suggests, and we don't know this with certainty, but there are people are following this up who are interested in this. It suggests that there's something about approaching that person, your body going, here I come. Okay, I'm not sitting in my chair, hanging out. It's like here I come. That makes a person energized, feel more romantic, feel more chemistry is happening, and more likely to ask on a date. And it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman at all. Okay, it's the getting up and that physical approach. Just you're more invested, you're more out there. Who knows what it is? Completely eliminates what everybody had said is an ancient, inevitable evolutionary difference between men. And this isn't to say there might not be some of those streaks in us. Who knows? But speed dating is not showing that. All you got to do is have the women rotate, and you completely eliminate what's thought to be some hardwired biological difference. Now, talking about
Okay, I think it doesn't have that much content yet. It gives into the possibility of talking a little bit about how, in general, I guess, if we do not pay attention to these minor details, we might be missing some almost important sides to this, because this is only dating, yes, but how much it could affect on other areas of our life, for example, on the act itself of, well, I mean, the dating comes from a side of, or at least how it was presented here. Both sides do not know each other beforehand, so it could even be applied to socials. It could even be applied to making relationships with others in general, I guess, then, because it shows and it creates almost, or it reflects onto the reality of how much you're really willing to pay attention and willing to really try anything if your environment does not move you to do it, I guess. Because, because if it even said it here, you stop having reasons to go out there and you stop having motives to really get anywhere by yourself. Why would you be less selective, let's say, or not selective, kind of the opposite? Why would you be selective? Instead, if you are moving, and if it is you who is experiences those things firsthand and trying really to get them to work, let's say, you are going to do it in a manner in which it also affects the results in a more, I don't know if it is positive or not, but I think if overall the average are increased, then it probably has to do, or it could be considered as a yes, I think, even if it is only in this sense, as I said before, the dating consensus, if you were to take it to other areas of life, you could see, and if you were to analyze it as it also happens there, that it ends up being positive to, so to speak, make others and give others the interest of moving on, let's say. But well, I don't really also have anything to really speak about here in this case, because I can't really find something to say so far.
about that, when we do experiments like this that look at sort of fun things like dating around a thing, or age difference between a 5-year-old and a 20-year-old, a 20-year-old and an 80-year-old, cultures, there's lots of experiments to compare, say, Western cultures versus certain Asian cultures. We'll talk about that later in the course in terms of behaviors. Genes, whether you have one gene or another, all those things, are those independent variables? We can't assign you randomly to be a man or a woman, young or old, come from the United States or Japan or China, or to have this gene or it's not that we couldn't do stuff, in some monstrous world, but not ethically, and it's never going to happen, right? So whenever you have science that talks about differences between men and women, or young and old, or cultures, or genes, it's not really a complete. You can't assign you random. So it means everything in the world about what it means to be a man or a woman, a 20-year-old or an 80-year-old, come from this continent or that continent, that gene. Those are not things we can freely manipulate. And we're extra cautious interpreting those. Okay, and I didn't talk about the fact that up until this moment, we've made every conclusion, generality about human nature, and people are different one from the other. Individual differences, we'll talk about that later in the course. So for the last couple of minutes, I want to talk about this. Folk psychology, everybody is at ease by psychology. So if you have this piece of paper, zoom through it, ideas about people in psychology, and just where there is some scientific evidence, if you just zoom down and mark yes or no, on average, do opposites attract? On average, does familiarity breed contempt? On average, more people present in an emergency, are you more likely to get some help? On average, are there such things as visual learners and verbal learners? And if they got the right kind of instruction, that would help them in school? Is hypnosis baloney? Does subliminal advertising work? When things are presented so you don't see them below consciousness, does it help you buy something? Does playing Mozart to an infant boost their intelligence? Mozart effect? Is old age on average associated with dissatisfaction? If you're unsure of your answer when taking a test, I'll tell you the science about this. It's best to stick with your first hunch. Practically every website tells you that. Have you heard that many times? Okay, I'm going to tell you what the actual evidence is about that and how they get that. Ulcers are caused primarily by stress. A positive attitude can stave off cancer. Raising children similarly leads to similarities in their adult personalities. Low self-esteem is a major cause of psychological problems. People's responses on the inkblot test tell us a lot about their personalities. Interviews help identify those most likely to succeed. Okay? I'll give you a minute. Okay. A bunch of these will come back in the course. The answer for all these is this, and there's evidence to it all. So I'm going to tell you about 4 of them for 10 minutes, okay? One of the ones you might want to know most about is the changing your initial hunch answer. Okay, how do you know that? So the people have gone back over test scores and look where people crossed out an answer or erased an answer. That's the best source of evidence they have in large samples. And people are twice as likely to give the correct answer than to move. That's the empirical evidence. Okay? So it's a fantastically interesting disconnect that you see so many places, and teachers advise you go with your first hunch when you're unsure. Empirical evidence is much more likely correct when you go with your best final answer. Okay, all right. I mean, of course, you're not sure, so you're going to miss a fair bit, but you're twice as likely to come out with the correct answer when you go with your best possible answer. So that people who crossed out their answers or erased their answers, they were twice as likely to move to a good answer, leave behind a good answer. Yeah.
Maybe it's not like they switch their answer and then taking the advice and going back to the
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We don't know. They could have gone like 5 times back and forth. The assumption has been on average that people will go once back and forth, but you're right. But ask yourself the other question too. What's the evidence ever at going with your hunches, and nobody's been able to? Okay, so where there's evidence, it's all in favor of best answer, and nobody's shown evidence that hunch is the best way to go empirically. That doesn't mean that sometimes it doesn't happen, but on average, that's the way that ends. But your point's excellent. Okay, so how about Rorschach tests? Every psychology program, clinical psychologist in the country is required to learn how to administer and evaluate a Rorschach. You know this? So this obviously shows some sort of horrible sex act between animals and no, it's you know these kinds of tests. You're supposed to read it, and an examiner listens to you, and they figure out something, right? Okay, there's been about 10,000 publications about this. There's no evidence that there's anything predictive or correct about this test. None, zero, none. Okay, people argue it, people give it. People have to learn how to give this test. So this is a disconnect that happens a lot between clinical stuff and experimental work. I mean, those researchers can't grasp why people still give this. Medical school interviews. Those of you who will apply to medical school will get interviews. You get interviews for jobs. You get interviews for all kinds of things in your life. What's the evidence that interviews are any good for anything? How could you know whether interviews are good for anything? A company interviews you. A university interviews you. How would you even decide whether? So I can tell you that social psychologists have shown repeatedly that interviews are cesspools for discrimination because people tend to like people who like them. Oh, you went to MIT? Yeah, course 9. Yeah. Then you go, oh man, this is going to be good, right? Or I went to Caltech. We didn't like MIT people. We thought they were a little bit snobbier. So there you go. Oh, that's not going to be so good, right? Okay. So social psychologists have shown if you just vary information and in practice interviews, people tend to like people who like them by background, by appearance. On average, they try not to. They try to be fair. But okay, so we know that. But how about okay? So here's what they did. Yale compared students who were accepted or rejected on the basis of an interview. So they all had scores that got them to the. And then they looked at them where they went in pairs or larger than pairs to other medical schools. Let's say you got accepted by Yale, and you were accepted or rejected on the interview, but you ended up as 2 students at Penn or Michigan. Okay? You're sitting next to each other. Right? One of you was accepted by interview at Yale. One of you was not. Who does better at that other? At even. Interview added nothing for predicting grade point average or completion. Here's one more example. University.
Hello, Momo. We are so far. I think we are close. Let's see. Yeah, we are 11 minutes close to finishing this course. Hello. We are, just in case, I think it is been. We are watching the second lecture so far. No much else to learn. Because, well, what I can tell you is, I can't really say anything at all. It ends up being kind of, not boring, but it is too much of an information that makes no sense to try and discuss, I think. Even more because it ends up lacking real anything at all to say. And yes, I am El Potato. Welcome. I hope you have a great time, so wherever you are and however you are feeling. Have a great time. Now, let us continue a little bit.
University of Texas enlarged in the midst of their at Houston in the midst of their interviews. It enlarged from 150 to 200 students. They had interviewed 800. 150 who came were among the top ones. They interviewed them. They liked them. They came. And then and all of a sudden, because the state legislature said we're by law mandating you take 50 more, they took 50 more who didn't do so well in the interview. Those 50 more performed identically. The ones got in, they couldn't find a difference. Now, there's at least one thing you might think the interview might have done, but we don't know. But people, what do you think it might have done? So the outcome was your grades in medical school and likelihood of getting medical school. What else could an interview have been relevant for? Maybe something about bedside manner or how you relate to people. Maybe. There's no evidence that that's true. Okay. Now you're starting to grasp at straws. So there's no evidence that interview processes make a difference anywhere. But everybody does interviews all the ways. We always think we're kind of good judges of humans. So interviews, it's very hard to tell that they ever do anything. So here's my last thing: self-esteem. You cannot watch Oprah or Dr. Phil without some discussion of self-esteem. And it sounds good to everybody. I mean, nobody would wish for you as a parent or friend for you to have low self-esteem. And in fact, higher self-esteem is correlated with higher initiative and persistence, happiness and emotional resilience, and also, unfortunately, people who are narcissistic and bullies. Okay, I mean, on average, and how they measure it, just so you know, because this is a problem too. Like, how do you measure it? You have there's several scales, but the most widely used scale is this Rosenberg scale. So you have that too, if you want to try it out on yourself. Okay, self-report. And when they reviewed 15,000 studies some years ago, they could find no evidence that higher self-esteem leads to better things. It all seemed the other way around. That like doing better at things led to higher self-esteem. Okay? They could never find that pushing your self-esteem up doesn't. Having said that, I can tell you as a parent of 2 young kids, or if you have friends and you care about them and you know this, we like to praise people to build up their self-esteem. Right? We tell you, you're awesome. You know, someday you'll go to MIT. I know you will. Okay? You're a wonderful person, and you're smart, and you're beautiful. And, you know, parents want their children, and teachers too, to grow up and thrive and build up that self-esteem. So how could, and the easiest way to do that is praise, right? Just telling your kid how awesome he is, younger sibling, how awesome he or she is. Get their self-esteem up. So the last thing I'm going to tell you, and then we'll be done in about.
Okay, I guess. Wait. This is
3 minutes. Is
okay.
work from Carol Dweck that shows you how dangerous it is to productive it is to have praise where you don't think through its relation to people. And one sentence we'll talk about: are you going to succeed in life by your effort or by your talent? You know, what's a bigger question than that? Wherever you get to in your life, it's going to be based on your effort or your. I'll just have a sentence about that now. But so here's the experiment she did with 5th graders. She had them perform a pretty hard task, and afterwards, randomly, they were either praised for their intelligence. So a person said to them, "You 5th grader, you are so smart. I can't believe you did on that." Okay, or they were praised for their hard work. This shows a lot of hard work. Okay, different kid, and some kids got no praise at all. In this experiment, okay. Now, then they get a task that's even a little bit harder. How does the different kind of praise influence things? And here was the finding: if you were praised for your intelligence, you did worse. If you were praised for your hard work, you did better. If nobody said anything, your performance didn't change. And the idea is this: you understand? Praise for your intelligence, you did worse. A hard task. Praise for your effort, you did better. And here's the idea: that if we praise people for their intelligence to build up their self-esteem, they start to care more about how their performance reflects on them than the performance itself. Because if you're trying to prove that you're an intelligent person, you care less. The students who get that kind of praise for their intelligence, they persist less in a difficult task. They say they don't enjoy challenges. Why? They just want to ace everything. Okay. The kids who get praise for effort, they're kind of like, okay, I'm going to make some mistakes, but I'm just going to keep going because with effort I can do things sometimes. And it turns out that it makes a remarkable thing. And so Dweck, we'll come back to this, talks about you can view your intelligence as a trait. I have only so much, or as a growth. The harder I work, the smarter I get, but I have to do the hard work there. Okay? And we live in a society that often goes by fixed traits. American Idol. The harder to work, the better you sing, or who has a talent is discovered. Who has a talent is discovered, right? Okay, right? Because the idea is, you have a certain amount of musical talent, and now the judges show, and you break into the world, and you're a famous singer, right? So ask yourself this: when you are good at what you do, is it because something in your genes or environment made you good at it, or is it because you try really hard? So Malcolm Gladwell has a statement that's floating around, gets a lot of attention, that anybody can become great at anything if they work on it for 10,000. So how much of your success in the past, currently, and in the future is going to be based on your effort, and how much is it going to be based on your talents? How would we know that? And we're a very talent-oriented society, and it seems like the more we encourage effort, maybe the more we flourish. So we talked about how psychology and science, experiments, brief history of psychology experimentation, some issues in experimentation, and then some psychological topics, and some practical information for being generous and kind and winning friends rapidly. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, I think then that's that's a good way to close it, man, because it finally said kind of what was needed before. If you really do not believe in the sense of this whole side of how, let's say, experiments are conducted and how you see the subjects with which you are interacting, if you think that they never have the possibility of being better, and if you also do not even try to give them praise where it is due, or sometimes even the random test wasn't based on their real abilities. It was only made to test if it is a change or if it doesn't affect at all how people feel when you, let's say, interact with them in such ways. So I think the message could be like, it seems like we lack a little bit of, or not that we lack, as it said there, it would be better if we gave more encouragement to others than to simply not pay attention to what they are doing, what they are saying, or sometimes to even kind of say, yeah, you are fine, and that's it. You're fine. I mean, in a sense, in a completely different area of life, it is also understood that we will not really want to praise anybody so much that they feel like we are kind of overwhelmingly showering them with our own interest, let's say. But I don't know. I don't know. As it as it said there, how much it also defines the person, the amount of efforts that they put or not, and how much of a success they are going to have if they really try or not. I guess it is a whole adventure that the individual needs to embark themselves on rather than to have it happen out of nowhere and have it, so to speak, exist without anybody's real interest at all, I would say. But I guess it was still very fine. That's all I can really say. It was still really fine. At the very least, the final part. When Momomo arrived, I said it before. There are also some parts in which content is lacking, at the very least. So it is hard to really say anything when you can't even try to say anything at all, you know. But well, we finished with this, so we might as well move on and do our best for the next time. Because so far we don't really have anything else to talk about. And well, we finished the second lesson. I don't know what is it when it is that we are going to go for the third and fourth one and all of that, but we finished the second lesson. So we are advancing with our goals. That is the good thing here. We are finally putting time where it is kind of needed, you know? Now, as I wanted to say before, we are really closing this up. We are going to see if I can write somebody. And I guess, yeah, it was another good occasion. And it was another beautiful progress. Even if by itself it didn't really have that much of anything at all to analyze or to really find, let's say, interesting or similar things. But I guess we did it. And we were able to progress with anything at all, you know. So yeah, I guess we were so far living with a right to hear. I think this guy deserves this. And boy drum, we are reading for boy drum, who is right now playing Thumber because we, as I said before, we need to also take a break. We need to not concentrate so much on other things, but better to keep resting a little bit more before really overworking ourselves to that, you know? But well, that was it. Another beautiful occasion, another beautiful chance to learn anything at all. As always, thanks for being here. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for watching the world, for lurking, for everything at all. As always, if it weren't for you, this wouldn't be happening anymore. So yes, we will find ourselves in the next occasion we have. Now it is time to take a break, and let's see when it is that it happens, that we get back to here. Now, right. Prrr, prrr.